Around the world, there are stories of creatures on the outskirts of scientific discovery, lurking beyond any notion of understanding. The tales range from the horrifying to the mystical in their existence, from humanoid to beastly in their appearance. But not all of these creatures seek to harm. Some are even known to bring positive aspects to the culture they're living amongst. But not all of these creatures seek to do good, with others being known to bring death and tragedy to those that cross their paths. But there's also a third kind, those that remain in the other, living away from any agenda. They exist in shadow, neither good nor evil, but simply surviving. The fourth kind are those that sit quietly amongst the two, balanced between the good and evil, but with their true intentions still very much up for debate, and every aspect heeded with an element of caution. My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is Mothman. I've always been fascinated by moths. Many people see butterflies as a sign of innocence and beauty. A moth is seen as a critter here to disturb the peace, a pest that we aim to rid ourselves of when they follow the enchantment of our lights. A moth uses the moonlight above as its navigation, a frail, elegant creature of the dark, guided by the moon's soft glow as they seek food and mates. You will sometimes hear of a butterfly being used as a metaphor for beauty, where a caterpillar emerges from its cocoon to become the beautiful creature its metamorphosis has created. As I see it, human beings are not butterflies, often lost in the dark, misdirected and confused by the lights that blind us as we try to navigate life. A moth is beautiful, its patterns intricate and unique, like every butterfly that flutters by your garden on a summer's day. Only with a moth, much like humans, you have to look that little bit closer to see its true beauty. Perhaps the reputation of this fluttering, somewhat menacing critter is what connected it to sightings of the winged creature of Mothman, a strange moniker when you find any description of what this creature of the skies apparently looked like, with no accurate indication that it ever had a moth-like appearance. With connections to spacecrafts, strange individuals lurking in the shadows, sightings in the sky, and a tragedy that would mark West Virginia's history forever, the tale of the Mothman slips in and out of fact and fiction more often than most urban legends manage to do. In my telling of a fictionalized witness account of the Mothman, we will follow young Malcolm as he rides his bike home from dinner at a friend's house. Malcolm was an ordinary boy in his early teens. He enjoyed watching comedies and sharing the occasional ghost story at sleepovers, but overall, he was far more interested in baseball. Today, his team had lost, but his friend's mum still invited a few of them back for dinner to celebrate how well they'd been doing recently. Dinner had been good, and the spirits had remained high, all things considered. But as the night had arrived and the sun had made way for the darkness to blanket the sky, it was time for the boys to go home. Two of the others had been picked up by their parents, but Malcolm lived reasonably close by, only 15 minutes by bike, 10 if he really pushed down on the pedals. And so, he headed home alone. Tonight, he was in no hurry to get back. His mum was working late, so there'd be nobody home when he arrived. And although he would never admit it to her or his friends, he found being home alone somewhat unnerving. He turned off the gravelly pathway he was on, feeling the warm summer evening breeze against his skin as he casually pedaled down the long stretch of road. He was surrounded by fields and trees on either side that he could just about make out in the glow of the moon that occasionally snuck out from behind some thin clouds above. He focused his eyes on the concrete ahead, lit by the directional light of the small lamp that gripped the bar between his handles. His mind wandering back to the game they had lost earlier that afternoon. He began to play back his actions and the actions of others in the team, mentally kicking himself for what he should have done to win. He was now growing frustrated and annoyed, still too young to understand that, in hindsight, things always seem more straightforward than what they felt like in the moment. The thoughts of a boy stuck between the ages of a child and a man are frivolous and fast, often moving on to the next subject within moments. But before young Malcolm's mind could move on, his night would change into something far more severe. Amongst the gentle breeze that brushed through his blonde hair as he rode, he heard a sound unfamiliar to his attuned ears. It sounded like a large, heavy flap of wings, only deeper and louder than anything he had heard before. He looked at the sky in gentle curiosity, but could see nothing but the white glow of the moonlight that fought and failed to emerge behind the clouds that had engulfed it amongst the windy skies. Malcolm ignored it, no reason to question what it was any further, taking his mind back to the game as he pedaled along the shadowed ground. The clouds had finally begun to disperse amongst the strong breeze above, and its soft, white glow had begun to tenderly caress the edges of the treetops surrounding him, making the road ahead a little bit easier to travel down. But there it was again, that sound. He turned back once more, looking up at the sky as he continued to pedal, but there was nothing to be seen but the moon's face beaming down on him from above. His feet began to move faster, the pedal spinning rapidly as he picked up the pace. An unnerving feeling of dread began to make its way through his blood like poison as he turned to continue up the long road. For a moment, Malcolm was suddenly engulfed in shadow as something large glided past the moonlight. He was being followed. He sharply turned again, staring at the moonlight, but whatever was there was no longer in sight. He turned his head to look back, ensuring that there was nothing in the skies following him from above, but doing this caused him to lose control at the speed he was going, and as he turned, he accidentally pulled the left handle towards him, causing the bike to suddenly twist and wobble uncontrollably. Malcolm quickly turned back, desperate to get control of his bike, but it was too late, and the young man was flung from his seat, slamming into the concrete beside him as he and the bicycle fell. With a loud clang, the bike's metal crashed by his feet as the concrete ripped away at the skin on the palm of his hands and knees. He laid there for a moment, hissing in pain as he clenched two fists before rolling over and sitting up, stretching out his bleeding leg. He looked up at the sky that sat silently and undisturbed amongst the darkness. He sighed and got to his feet, limping towards his bike and picking it up. But as he did, he noticed something in the glimmer of the bike's light. He paused, gripping both handles in his shaking hands tightly, knowing he had to turn the wheel back to where it was so he could confirm his sighting. But he was too afraid to do so. With his short breaths and his eyes filling with water, he slowly turned the wheel of his bike, pointing the headlight down the long road in the direction he had just passed. Standing in the middle of the road, just about within the light's reach, was a large, tall creature with long, strong, muscular legs, below what looked to be a human-like torso, with two large wings reaching out over its shoulders from its back. Malcolm froze, watching it as it stood facing the trees to his right. It did not move. Perhaps it hadn't seen him. Maybe it didn't know he was there. Malcolm gulped hard, his heart pounding loudly inside of his chest as he slowly began to turn the bike's front wheel to face the road ahead so he could jump on and ride away from the creature. But the moment Malcolm turned the bike, causing the light to move ever so slightly, the beast turned its head, revealing its glowing red eyes as they burned through the darkness, directly onto Malcolm's fearful face. He wanted to scream, but he could not. So instead he gasped for air as he jumped onto his bike's seat and began pedaling as fast as he could. He turned back once and only once to ensure the monster was not following him, But to his dismay, the giant wings had spread out wide, at least 12 feet across, creating a demonic silhouette in the moonlight, its red eyes still fixated on Malcolm's struggling body. He turned back to the road and pushed as hard as he could against the pedals as he heard the large flap of the monster's wings once more as it darted into the darkness above. Malcolm continued his journey, too terrified to even question what was happening as he sped up the street with all of his might. Tears began to fall down his cold face as the breeze morphed into a sharp wind at the pace he had picked up. It was following him. He couldn't see it, he couldn't hear it, but he knew that it was close. And he knew that it was watching his every move. Finally, he made it to the end of the driveway at his house. He knew nobody would be home, but he still hoped that something had perhaps happened at work, meaning his mother would have needed to come home early. At this stage for Malcolm, hope was all he had left, wholly exposed to the creature's torment amongst the shadow of the night. He pedaled fast up the pathway until he finally reached the steps of his wooden porch. He slammed the bike to the floor, jumping off mid-pedal, landing on the first step and pacing to the front door in one swift motion. He pulled out his house key and stuck it inside before yanking the door open and slamming it closed behind him. He sharply locked it with the key before pulling the chain across its frame to ensure double protection. He slammed his hand against the light switch beside him, flicking the porch lights on outside. But there was nothing he could see. He slowly stepped closer to the glass beside the door, gently pulling back the netted curtains for a clearer view. The wheel of his bike was still slowly turning from where it had been slammed to the ground. The chair to his left still sat amongst the night, and a small moth danced with the porch light above the front door, desperate to navigate to a place it would never reach. Maybe it didn't follow me, he thought to himself as he let go of the netted curtains, allowing it to fall in front of his face once again. But before he could turn to switch on the lamps inside, a floorboard outside creaked from a heavy foot. Malcolm's breath left him again, as if the air had been sucked out of the house. In a reflex to hide, he jumped forward and flicked the light switch again, dropping the porch into blackness. He remained in the hall's darkness, listening quietly, struggling to breathe, but still trying to make as little noise as possible. The wood outside creaked again as it took another step. Now, he could tell where it was coming from. The creature was standing on the porch outside the living room window. He slowly turned his head to look into the room, noticing a slight glow of red against the porcelain of the lamps that rested in the darkness. It was peering through the glass. It was looking for him. Malcolm took a gentle step back, his hands gripped in fists, as if he would ever be able to fight off this otherworldly beast that was hunting his every step. He took another step back, causing a creak in the floorboard himself on the wooden beam below his feet. The red glow turned away from the living room window in the front door's direction. It now knew for sure that he was there. Malcolm took another step back as he heard the porch creak again. He turned, keeping his body facing the front door ahead, and stepped ever so slightly into the living room. He turned his head to the window where he could just make out the end of the creature's wings disappear out of sight as it finally arrived at the front door. Malcolm didn't know what to do. If he ran to the door and held it shut, he would just be confirming to the monster that he was inside. And who's to say that this young man would be able to hold any ground on the other side of the door to this enormous beast? A mixture of fear and curiosity had gotten the better of him as he stood in the doorway. So he leaned forward to see the front door with one eye, still hiding most of his face and body away. He could see nothing through the netted curtains, only blackness on the other side of the glass. But he knew it was there, standing feet away from him on the other side of that wooden door. He gripped the living room door frame so hard that his knuckles had turned to white as he stood firm on his two shaking legs, watching the door handle as it slowly began to twist. Malcolm's breathing grew heavier as it twisted back. It turned again, this time harder, as the creature attempted to get inside. It seemed this frustrated it, as it twisted and turned the handle again, now shaking and pulling at the door, causing it to thud against the wood that echoed through the house. It was strange for Malcolm. By the size and build of this monster, it seemed it could easily break through the door, and yet it was not. Instead, it was simply instilling fear and panic in the young man's heart, as the pounding, shaking, and thudding grew more intense. There was nowhere to hide. How does a teenage boy run from a creature of this design? There was nowhere for young Malcolm to go. He knew this. So he closed his eyes and began to cry, knowing that these few moments would likely be his last. But with that realization came a surprise to the young boy, as a bright white light shone upon his face through the glass. So bright, it seemed to frighten off the mysterious creature, who instantly let go of the handle. Malcolm opened his eyes as he heard the sound of the large wings shooting up into the air once again, followed by the hum of his mother's car as she pulled up outside. In a panic, he darted to the front door and unlocked it, flinging it open for her to get inside, understanding how horrified she must have been by what she had just seen. But as he witnessed her step out of the car, she looked tired and run down from work. But no fear was visible on her face. "Malcolm, what have I told you about just dumping your bike outside?" she sighed as she stepped up the steps on the wooden porch before heading into the house. She hadn't seen a thing. Malcolm never told his mother about the events of that night. He said to himself that he didn't want her to be frightened, but in truth, it was more that he didn't want her to think that he was losing his mind. He never travelled down that road again, not even during the day, and he would avoid looking up at the night sky whenever he could. Malcolm would never witness this creature again, but ever since those red eyes stared into his on that long stretch of road, he would forever still be able to sense its presence nearby, amongst the darkness of the night. Whereas most urban legends remain tales at campfires, sleepovers, water coolers, or on the school playground, Mothman has evolved to become a different entity entirely. Since its first sightings in the 60s, the mysterious creature and the tales of its arrival have become a staple of Point Pleasant's culture. This town that sits quietly in West Virginia, USA, explodes into excitement once a year as they hold the Mothman Festival, with runs, guest speakers, bus tours, food stalls selling cookies and pizzas shaped as the creature, live bands, and even a Mothman museum. The streets fill with tourists and locals, some even dressing up as the entity itself, all happening around the metal statue that proudly stands in the center of town all year round, its glowing red eyes watching the passers-by each day and night. For some, this legend is a fun story with a freaky origin. Nothing but a great excuse to have a laugh and entice some much-needed money into the local economy. To others, it is an event that represents a reminder of the dark mysteries that lurk close by to us all. This differentiating opinion is no different to any other story around the world, with some enjoying tales of ghosts, ghouls, and monsters as nothing more than scary stories to share in the dark, whilst others grip the legend with both hands, delving deep into its existence and using it as further evidence of their spooky beliefs. So much of the legend of Mothman is so outlandish and even contradictory. Some sightings suggest that the being is more creature-like, with large wings that it uses to fling into the darkness of the sky. Other sightings suggest it is more of a story of a telepathic, humanoid-like man who can communicate with specific individuals. Others see these two creatures as two separate but connected entities. The name Mothman is contradictory in its description and strange in its origins, always described as more bird-like than anything else. Most notably, an owl with big red eyes. Research suggests the christening of the name Mothman was born out of the mind of an unknown copy editor, inspired by one of the Batman comics' sillier villains, Killer Moth. The belief in Mothman lives on around the world today, venturing far out from the origins of Point Pleasant. This is primarily thanks to the Hollywood film The Mothman Prophecies, released in 2002, starring Richard Gere and Laura Linney. The story followed a semi-fictionalized version of the accounts of John Klein as he investigated the horrified town that was being haunted by the mysterious creature that lurked above. Gere's character, John Klein, was heavily inspired by John Keel, the real-life investigator who dedicated much of his life to the mysteries of Mothman. The movie itself was, in fact, based on the book of Keel's discoveries, filled with its flared-up versions of events that were exaggerated even further in the scripting phase of the film until it became a Hollywood-level supernatural thriller. With this release, it welcomed the story of Mothman into the greater world as it spread its wings far beyond Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Now, the excitement of the true story of what occurred was growing, and with it, so did the excitement of the Mothman's existence until it became not just a local legend, but a legend of the world. With the internet growing and a computer sitting in most houses now, the tales had grown bigger, darker, and more mysterious, circulating the story far more expansive than ever before. It was as recent as 2016 that a supposed sighting of Mothman was reported. It was WCHS-TV that first published the now infamous photo that purported to be of the Mothman mid-flight. Taken by an anonymous man whilst driving down Route 2 in Mason County, West Virginia, the picture has awakened much debate on its legitimacy. Some claim it to be real. Others claim it to be an image of a bird or an owl simply carrying a frog or a snake away to feast on. Some say that it's neither, just a Photoshop job to reignite some excitement. If you type in its name on Etsy, you'll be greeted by hundreds of plush toys, stickers, printed t-shirts, and more. It has even gone mainstream, with a Mothman available in certain Build-A-Bear stores for children. Many have seemingly taken the creature under their wing as a cute, harmless, lovable character, with some even using it as a mascot for trans rights. Although to most, the being remains nothing more than a bizarre story to share as a form of modern folklore. Its early days filled the air with the voices of many believers. Now, I may not be a believer in the supernatural myself, but something was most definitely going on in the first half of winter in 1966 amongst the dark roads of Point Pleasant. There were, in fact, several sightings of the creature in some form or another, all separate and all as strange as each other. To fully understand where the legend of Mothman came from, we must first delve into its origins. If you're still with me, then I know you share the same passion for folklore and urban legends that drives this show. But to keep bringing you these stories, I need your help. Every season comes to life with the incredible support of listeners like you on Patreon. For just £3 a month, less than the price of a small coffee, you can help ensure that this show continues to thrive, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content available. But that's not all. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks like access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, where we dive into lesser known but equally captivating tales like the Hodag, Black-Eyed Children, the Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll gain instant access to our entire library of bonus content the moment you join, with new chapters coming each season. You'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at how the show is made, discounts on merchandise, and an invitation to our private group chat, where you can connect with me directly and share your love for urban legends with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Plus, as a special treat, I randomly select patrons to feature in upcoming stories, so you might find yourself becoming part of the very legends we explore. Supporting us on Patreon isn't just about subscribing. It's about joining a team dedicated to preserving and expanding on our collection of folklore. Your contribution directly fuels the research, production, and growth of the show, helping us continue this incredible journey together. So, if you're ready to take the next step and become an integral part of the Urban Legends community, head over to our Patreon page via the link in our show notes and choose the paid subscription. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, where we can keep these tales alive. And now, back to the legend. It was Tuesday, the 15th of November 1966, when Linda and Roger Scarberry were driving down a long road with Steve and Mary Mallet. The two couples were joyriding in a black 1957 Chevy towards a remote hangout spot north of Point Pleasant known as the TNT area. According to Linda's official testimony, it was during this journey that Steve reportedly yelled for them to all, "Look at that thing in the road!" Linda claimed that she looked up to see a large, winged, human-like creature as it disappeared around the corner of an old powerhouse. She explained that it did not run, but wobbled like it could not quite keep its balance, with its wings spread just a little bit. They sat there for a moment before Roger finally put his foot down and sped off, whilst Linda called for him to hurry. She would also explain in this testimony that it looked like a man with wings that were dirty grey in colour. It seemingly had a human body shape form, with wings on its back that curved around it. It had muscular legs and fiery red eyes that glowed when the car's lights hit it. She also added that she did not see its head or arms, admitting that she did not even know if it had a head. John Keel, the man often associated with being the key expert in the legend of Mothman, would later add elements to the creature's appearance. This first witness account suggested that the eyes would only glow red in a light's reflection, somewhat like what would occur with a cat. However, this description would evolve to be glowing red eyes, 2 to 3 inches in diameter, and set wide apart like an owl. Whilst the two couples sped off down the road away from the powerhouse, they all remained in shock, unsure of what they once knew was reality. I imagine they would have discussed it further, although this was not the end of their tale. As they turned a curve while speeding down the dark road, they noticed the creature sitting upon a billboard, watching them from above. As they passed, the creature spread its wings wide and straight into the sky. They all yelled and screamed to go faster as the terrifying entity glided back and forth over the back end of their car. Linda would later say, "We didn't know what it was. I don't think we've ever been so scared." By now, they were moving at over 100 miles per hour as they zoomed along the large stretch of road ahead, but the monstrous being could still follow easily. Its wings would hit the car when it drew closer to the vehicle. Its shadow would be cast across the bonnet as it swooped by. Its red eyes would reflect through the back of the window as it trailed behind. On top of all this was a strange addition. Mary Mallet would later confirm that it made the sounds of squeaks, like a giant mouse. It was not until they finally reached the town of Point Pleasant that the creature we now know as Mothman disappeared, veering off into a nearby field as they headed into the more densely populated areas. The foursome parked at Tiny's diner, where they would head inside to call the police, explaining what they had just seen. Deputy Millard Halstead did not necessarily believe their story as they had told it, but he did consider that these young adults were not known as troublemakers. And with this in mind, he took it seriously enough. The four drove back to the TNT area with the deputy at hand. where he would shine a spotlight into the treetops. It has been said that the group who sat nervously in the car whilst the deputy stepped outside witnessed the creature's shadow once more. On top of this, it is also reported that the deputy himself had heard unexplained, strange static disturbances coming from the radio. However, overall, he found no sign of the strange entity itself. The following day, Sheriff George Johnson held a press conference to discuss the sightings of the previous night. Here, the local media began to pick up the spooky stories of the monster of Point Pleasant. Steve Mallett would later say, "We understand people are laughing at us, but we wouldn't make up all this to make us look like fools." Nobody at the time could have known that this strange, confusing turn of events would be the birthing of a new worldwide legend. One that would become a mascot of the town for years to come. A day after the horrifying sighting that had haunted the minds of the young group, there was another strange occurrence, one that is said to have scarred the victims for life. Marcella Bennett was visiting her sister, Virginia Thomas, at her home, accompanied by her 2-year-old daughter Tina and her brother, Raymond Wamsley, with his wife, Kathy. Her sister and her husband, Virginia and Ralph, were not home, but 3 of their children, Ricky, Connie, and Vicky, were. The names and number of people at this scene that night are vast but relevant. This is because, according to these individuals, this encounter was seen by multiple witnesses. After a short stay, Marcella left the house, carrying her daughter in her arms as she walked towards her car. Her brother Raymond and his wife Kathy reportedly stepped out of the house shortly after, and it was here that Raymond claimed that he looked up into the sky and noticed red lights hovering in the air above the car. Marcella also noticed this in the corner of her eye, although what she could see was far more apparent than what her brother had witnessed. She would later explain that the thing was a vast, grey, winged creature with large red eyes. Marcella froze in fear, horrified, confused, and somewhat hypnotized, so much so that she even dropped her child to the floor and collapsed. The story goes that she quickly recovered, scooping up her daughter and charging back to the house, where they called the police. But by the time officers arrived, the creature the group had claimed to have witnessed was gone. Whatever it was, or whatever the actual events were that unfolded, it is an undeniable truth with multiple reports that Marcella took months to recover from the incident, seeking medical attention to deal with the anxieties that she had been left with. Sightings of the creature quickly began to spread across the area, with outlandish stories all over Point Pleasant, and the hyperbole that inevitably followed is chaotic yet traceable. On Thursday the 17th of November, 2 days after Linda Scarberry's testimony, a 17-year-old boy named Steve Farrell was featured in Saga magazine. He described a giant grey bird that chased his automobile on Route 7 near Cheshire, Ohio, just across the river from the TNT area. John Keel took this story and ran with it in his investigation. However, either purposely or accidentally, he had morphed the narrative once again, now becoming the tale of a grey, man-like creature with red eyes. This description is now often associated with this story as further evidence of the sightings. Keel would also later share the events of a man that witnessed a creature on the 25th of November, a week after the previous sightings. This time, the creature was sighted in the day, 7:15 a.m. to be exact. The man, Thomas Eerie, was driving along Route 62 just north of the TNT area when he noticed a tall, grey man-like figure standing in a field by the road. Suddenly, it spread a pair of wings and took off straight into the sky like a helicopter. Keel's placement of this story on his list of noteworthy encounters has solidified its placement amongst the legend as proof of its existence. Although, with some light digging, The original testimony can be found in a Point Pleasant Register article published on the 25th of November. With the title, "Oh, that bird, it was seen again," the interview explains that Thomas Urey had witnessed what he called a huge bird rising over the trees and approaching his car like a helicopter. He commented that he had seen big birds in his life, but had never seen anything quite like this. In his description, he explained it was greyish-brown in colour, was some 6 feet in length, and had at least an 8 to 10 foot wingspan. Urey explained that he did see a bill, but not one that was unusually big. He also explained that he did not see red eyes, although some had theorized that daylight was the reason for this. Urey never mentioned a tall, grey man-like figure standing in the field that suddenly spread a pair of wings and shot up into the sky. And to this day, Thomas Urey discounts John Keel's famous version of the events. It was primarily thanks to newspapers that the tales of the Mothman spread so fast, playing a massive role in delivering local news and information regarding the subject. What is more interesting is that, with the number of articles written at the time, you would think it would surely have been a widespread phenomenon for some time. However, the newspaper's love affair with the exciting mystery of the creature lasted no longer than a week in the November of 1966. The stories would continue to circulate, and the sightings would carry on through word of mouth. But it seems that, as quickly as the stories had arrived, they had left the black and white pages of the news. During this week, the same night of Steve Farrell's encounter, the local townsfolk swarmed the TNT area in what newspapers referred to as torch and pitchfork mode, replacing the medieval tools with flashlights and firearms. The public clogged up the roads in the area as they searched for any sight of the monster they now knew as Mothman. Even the fire department had been called out to assist in traffic duty to ensure easy passage, with one firefighter commenting, "It looks like Mason County fair time." Alongside these men were civil defense and National Guardsmen, who patrolled the area along with the sheriff and deputies. Eventually, the wildlife station was clogged up again a few nights later. By now, the authorities' patience on the matter, which they deemed somewhat silly, was growing thin. Sheriff George Johnson was forced to announce that anyone caught in the TNT area with a loaded gun after dark would be arrested. He warned people to stay away, explaining that walking around an abandoned powerhouse after dark risked severe injury to themselves. There are so many more encounters that could be covered that if I delved into them all, we would be here for hours. There are sightings said to predate those of Linda Scarberry and her friends. Many more are said to have come later. But one that stands out to me is a sighting that is often deemed to be connected and is almost entirely a new story in its own right. It was reportedly Wednesday the 2nd of November 1966, when sewing machine salesman Woodrow Woody Durenberger had a strange encounter with a man outside of Parkersburg, West Virginia, just north of Point Pleasant, along the Ohio River. Woodrow was driving his red-paneled truck along Route 77 when he claimed to have seen a flying, metallic, cigar-shaped craft. The craft travelled right by his truck and blocked the roadway ahead, gradually making him slow to a stop on the other side of the road. The aircraft was apparently hovering about 12 inches off the ground when a door opened, revealing a being that stepped outside and onto the road ahead. The vehicle climbed 50 feet into the air whilst the being walked up to Woodrow's window. The being, who looked like a man, had a demeanour that was extremely disturbing to Woodrow. Described as being 6 foot tall, around 35 years of age, with olive skin, dark brown hair, and wearing a glossy, metallic dark blue coat. It is reported that the man-like being asked Woodrow to wind down his window. Although strangely, they did not say this with words. In fact, he did not move his mouth at all. He remained with a fixed smile, with his words arriving in Woodrow's mind telepathically. During this encounter, the being would introduce himself with the now famous name of Indrid Cold. He explained to Woodrow that he meant no harm, but even still, Woodrow would later say, "I was very frightened, and as far as I can understand, this was all mental. There were no spoken words from him. I knew what he was asking me, yet he stood there and his mouth did not move. He had a smile on his face. He appeared very courteous and friendly." Their conversation lasted around 10 minutes, during which time Indrid Cold would tell Woodrow that they eat, breathe, sleep, and even bleed as humans do. At the end of their dialogue, he returned to his craft, saying, "We will see you again." Later, Woodrow Woody Durenberger would report the incident to the police, becoming, in turn, part of another urban legend, the Smiling Man. It seems the events of this encounter and that of the Mothman happened too close in time and proximity for it to be deemed a coincidence. Although no real connection has ever been made other than speculation and fantasy, and the story of Indrid Cold has now merged into the narrative of the cryptid in the sky. Over the course of this month, Woodrow would claim that Indrid Cold consistently visited him and that he'd even taken him for a ride in his spaceship back to his home planet. Cold would also apparently appear at Woodrow's front door, with his wife and children witnessing Indrid with their own eyes, later coming forward to confirm Woodrow's claims. His story had garnered so much media attention that locals would eventually flock to his house at all hours of the day. They waited in crowds, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous Indrid Cold, with some claiming to have witnessed the spaceship land there. Around this time, Mothman had also begun to emerge from the TNT area shadows, and Point Pleasant was seemingly erupting with supernatural and otherworldly tales. With sightings spread around the world through the words of John Keel, it seems he was either intentionally or unintentionally spicing up the events, molding them to fit a through-line narrative better, one that was optimistically more exciting and pessimistically more marketable. It would be foolish to deny that those amongst the firm believers of Mothman will continue to believe, even with the small glimmer of insights I have provided. There are dozens more sightings and numerous more examples of the stories not quite gelling unless they are fitted together in a way that forces them to make sense. Alongside the Mothman Prophecies film release, John Keel's book of the same title, full of exaggerated accounts of the creature, was republished. It even made its way onto the New York Times bestsellers list. The film claimed that the story was based on true events. But as is always the case with this highly vague statement in the film industry, the subject, the town it was based in, and a few tweaked incidents were the only recognizable aspects to what had occurred in reality. Many of these mysteries will never truly be solved because, as a society, we do not want them to be. They feed off their mystery, living in our imaginations and growing in our suspense. Any legitimate answer or definitive truth would rid it of all nourishment, and eventually it would cease to exist. It is worth looking into an interview recorded on the 11th of July 2001 with Linda Scarberry. She looked back on the night's events that had occurred nearly 35 years after the encounter. This was to be included in the book Mothman, The Facts Behind the Legend. Here she explained that she saw a being that stood around 7 feet tall, with large wings on its back, the tips visible above its shoulders. She explained that the body was like that of a slender, muscular man and was flesh-like in colour, whilst its wings were ashen white, like that of an angel. Its face could not be seen, as the moment they were to look at it, its eyes would hypnotise them. It was described that it was not that it did not have a head or a neck. It was just that the eyes were so mesmerising that the moment you looked upon them, that was all you could really focus on. She explained as she thought back on the night of 1966 that when the lights first hit the creature, It turned to look directly at them as if it was scared. It had one of its wings caught in a guide wire near a section of the road close to the power plant and was pulling at it with its hands as it tried to free itself. She explained that they sat there and watched it for a moment. Not for long, but long enough to scare it, as it seemed to act as if it thought they were going to hurt it. She claimed they all screamed to go, but they could not perform the actual act of leaving the scene, as if they were hypnotized. The creature finally got loose from the wire and ran into the power plant, out of sight. Although there are apparent similarities between Linda's original account and this more recent look back, there are noticeable changes. The colour and description of the creature become more theatrical and in-depth. It is not that Linda is lying. This is just a classic case of our memory's deception that so often help us push the narratives of urban legends. Over time, the various artistic interpretations and eyewitness testimonies would undeniably seep into our minds, mixing in with our memories and distorting them. Several studies have proven that eyewitnesses inadvertently incorporate information learned after the event into the memories at hand. This phenomenon, named post-event contamination, is simply information that has been learned after the event had taken place. And from there, without the witness's knowledge, it is integrated into that memory, sometimes warping into a narrative that never truly occurred. This effect happens to us all. Our emotions and ideas get in the way of our thoughts and morph what we remember to have occurred. How many times have you had a sentence you said mid-argument repeated back to you, only for you to point out that they have added extra venom and viciousness to how you said it? Often, this is not a case of conscious deceit, but more of a mixed-up memory as they subconsciously imprinted the emotion they felt from the sentence onto how it was being said to begin with. This is why eyewitness testimonies are often taken as quickly as possible after a crime or tragic event. And with this in mind, you may be surprised to learn that eyewitness testimony does not stand up to scrutiny in court proceedings as much as we may first believe. The legend of Mothman was widely spoken about amongst the various voices of the town, bringing excitement and danger to the quiet neighborhood of Point Pleasant. Unfortunately, as many basked in the exciting faux danger of the Mothman, an authentic tragedy was just around the corner. It was on the 15th of December 1967, exactly 17 months after the first official encounter with Mothman. The main street of Point Pleasant led straight onto an I-bar chain-style suspension bridge, titled the Silver Bridge, due to its aluminium paint across the Ohio River. Whilst full of cars and passengers, many of whom were heading to and from an evening of Christmas shopping, the bridge began to shake. It was at 5:05 p.m. when the air filled with the moaning of metal before turning to a harsh screech. Within moments, the bridge had collapsed. 46 people died in the tragedy, 9 were injured, and 2 were unfortunately never found. This remains to be the worst bridge accident in the history of the United States of America. For days, rescue workers pulled out smashed cars and lifeless bodies from the river, filled with debris left behind by the tragic events that had occurred on the coldest night of the year. This took over the headlines for some time, and instantly the notion of a flying monster seemed inconsequential to the people living with such a horrific event happening so close by, affecting so many families that resided there. But although it may have slowed down the town's interest in Mothman, it did not hinder John Keel's eagerness to understand it further. He would even later claim that a month prior, he had interviewed a woman who was said to have had a terrible nightmare, one where many people were drowning in the river, surrounded by Christmas presents. When Keel returned to Point Pleasant on the Thanksgiving of 1967, he claimed that people in the area had terrible dreams and nightmares about an oncoming disaster. Eventually, and some could argue inevitably, the bridge collapse had also merged into the narrative of Mothman. Some suggested that the sighting of both Ingrid Cold and the winged creature seemed to have been building up towards this event. Many believers suggested that it all may have even been connected somehow. Adding to this notion were the eventual recollections of apparent sightings of Mothman near the bridge just before the collapse had occurred. This addition to the legend began the notion of Mothman being an omen of doom. This would open the doors to the legend to spread to other catastrophic events worldwide, with sightings and an apparent photograph of the creature amongst the smoke of the 9/11 terrorist attacks in New York City. Mothman had become many things to many people. He was a tourist trap, a scary story, a creature from the future, an interdimensional being, a trans ally, a space alien that had arrived with the ships of Ingrid Cold, an angel, a demon, a mutant, an animal, a beast, an omen, or simply a lie. Over the 13 months that Mothman's wings cast their shadow over the town of Point Pleasant, over 100 witness accounts had been documented. There is no denying that something was going on in West Virginia in the latter half of the 60s. Now, I may not believe that an interdimensional being lived amongst the townspeople. I may also believe that a fair few of these testimonies would have been made up as pranks or as a minor claim to fame. Regardless, something was lurking about the dark skies of November of 1966. Something that, at the very least, triggered the confusion and excitable hyperbole that would eventually spread around the world. Early reports of the creature were skeptical, with the newspapers referring to Mothman as a bird or a mysterious creature. Dr. Robert L. Smith, an associate professor of wildlife biology at West Virginia University, was one to publicly dismiss the notion of a flying monster. Instead, he attributed many of the sightings to a sandhill crane, which can stand almost as tall as the average male, with bright red flesh around its eyes. This was a compelling argument considering how many early reports described the creature as bird-like. Although with the supernatural ideas already gripping the general public, and the glowing red eyes now solidified in their ideas of what this being looked like, the hypothesis was hit with pushback. Some found themselves in the middle, understanding the realistic explanation of the crane, whilst also not wanting to let go of the mystery entirely. This led to speculation that Mothman was, in fact, a deformed sandhill crane that resided in the TNT area. It was said that the bunkers left behind from the Second World War in this area had leaked toxic materials into the neighbouring wildlife preserve and possibly affected the nearby animals. Another theory of Mothman's origins is that a committed prankster hid in the abandoned munitions plant where some of the sightings had occurred, and here he would attempt to scare any that saw him. This theory speculates that the locals began to panic as the sightings progressed, eventually leading to them growing convinced that they were seeing Mothman in birds or other large animals, long after the prankster had moved on from the joke and left. It may seem silly to suggest that this long, beaked bird is the cause of the cryptid. I'm in no way saying that this is the actual cause of these incidents, but is it any more silly to believe that this was a large bird than it is to believe that it's a mystical being that can defy the laws of physics? We must ask ourselves why we are so easy to dismiss one idea and not the other when it comes to supernatural beliefs. Could it perhaps be what had been previously suggested, that the mystery is far more exciting than the truth could ever be?
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.